Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead for the sake of time and to honor everybody's timeliness in showing up at this EDWeek online session. My name is Rebecca Bustamante, and I'm an Associate Dean in the College of Education here at Cal State Long Beach. And this session is being offered as part of our EDWeek online. Typically, the College of Education at Cal State Long Beach has an EDWeek every spring. And of course, and it's in person, and we have lots of events and conferences. And so like all of us, we decided that we would go ahead with some of our offerings because our students are really ask for it. And so we're trying to honor our students' interest. And this is our panel on tips for success in navigating challenges in educational environments. And we have 3 panelists today that I'd like to introduce. You should have received their bios, and I'd like to first introduce Blaine Watson, and he is a educational leader with a tremendous amount of experience, most recently as principal of Dominguez High School for Compton Unified School District. He's currently pursuing a doctoral degree at the University of at USC, and then he has an extensive experience in a lot of different roles with Centinela High School District and many other roles that I know he'll share with you. I'd like to also introduce, maybe you can wave, Blaine, because we got lots of folks here, okay. And then we have Connie Moreno Yamashiro, and she is coming to us from Cal State University, Fullerton, correct? Yes, and she has also, she's a Cal State University Long Beach graduate of our doctoral program in educational leadership. And she has also held many roles more in student affairs and higher education. So she'll be able to share with us the higher education administration perspective. And then we have Gwendolyn Nolasco, who most recently worked with Millikan High School, correct? And Long Beach Unified School District, but she also lectures as a lecturer for Cal State University Long Beach. All 3 folks, Blaine also has worked with Cal State University Dominguez Hills as a lecturer. They will be able to give you lots of different perspectives from both the K-12 and the higher education perspective. So the way that this session will work is it is a panel discussion. And so what I'm going to do is a little bit like a journalist and ask them to share some questions, share some responses to some specific questions. We've turned off the chat for this time while our panelists are sharing their experiences. And then at the end of the chat, or the end of the panel discussion, we will open up the chat, and we have a couple of moderators that will be helping with our questions so that we can make sure that you have a chance to talk with the panelists as well. I also want to introduce a couple of other folks from Cal State Long Beach. Dana Ocampo, can you show yourself for a moment? Okay, she is our main moderator for this panel. And she's a master's student in our student affairs program at Cal State Long Beach, but she also works in the educational leadership department, keeping it running, right? And then we have Gwendolyn Muzian, who you all probably have heard of. She is our outreach coordinator here at Cal State Long Beach, and it has been really instrumental in setting up helping us orchestrate all these EDWeek online events. So do you want to wave for a moment, Wendy, so we know who you are? So she will also be helping us out here. And we also have some of our student ambassadors online who are teacher candidates, and they work closely with us in outreach, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Perhaps we can go in order. Maybe we can start with Blaine. This is kind of how you are on my screen. Blaine, Connie, and then Gwendolyn, if that's okay. So our big question for you for starters is, how did you decide to become an educator?
Mm.
and tell us a little bit about your trajectory to becoming an
Yeah.
educator.
That's a great question. Thank you, Rebecca. I actually was just reflecting on this the other day in a network that I'm part of, the Compton Male Teacher of Color Network. We do a lot of work with diversity and teacher recruitment and retention, specifically men of color in education. And my story was interesting. I graduated from the University of San Diego undergrad, and my senior year in 2002, I was doing campus interviewing. I was interviewing for different jobs in basically in business, in sales, interviewed with the FBI, interviewed with the Julio Gallo Wine Company. And as a lot of students, when you're in your senior year, think about making money right after you graduate. It wasn't until the University of San Diego, the School of Education, offered a scholarship for African American males for single subject, a full scholarship, and the first and second year of the graduate program, a master's in teaching and learning. And so I applied, and all the while I'd been working with kids locally at a local high school, an after school program. I was teaching or coaching baseball. I was a college athlete. And so I just kind of fell into that opportunity. I really didn't know I wanted to become an educator. So when I did my student teaching, I 100% fell in love with it. And it wasn't until I took a reading methods class by one of my professors, Dr. Ron Wogan. I'll never forget him. He assigned us a project, and it was a semester-long project that had us go from thinking basically we had to end up writing a 20-page term paper on our intellectual passion, right? We start off with 20 pages, but we had to really just narrow it down at the end of the term to a one pager, right? And so I was a Spanish teacher. So I fell in love with Spanish because I wanted to teach Spanish culture. My background is my mother's Cuban, my dad's from Panama. I was born in Panama, and I understand I was always really connected with my culture, but I didn't necessarily know how to project that into the world and know how to represent it well. And so being able to teach culture through language was something that I was in love with, and I realized that wasn't teaching the actual language wasn't my passion. It was the sociological aspect of teaching foreign language, right? And so that's how I fell into it. And from there, that was in 2002, and I've never left education. I found my niche. My student teaching opportunity at Mira Mesa High School in San Diego was what really convinced me that I needed to stay for the long haul, and here I am still.
That's super. Thank you very much, Blaine. Connie, can you share with us how you became an educator and a little bit about your pathway?
Absolutely. So I will share that my original trajectory was to be in the music industry. I was a comm major, communications major at Cal State Fullerton, and I quickly realized that that was not the right fit industry for me. And so at the same time, I was a highly involved student leader. I was an orientation leader. I was a tour guide, so I have the talent of walking backwards and guiding a large group of students and prospective students and family members. I was a peer mentor. I was involved in ASI, Associate Students Incorporated, and all along I didn't realize that I was really building a path for my career. So I was very fortunate that I had a mentor as an undergraduate who informed me about this undergraduate mentor program. It used to be called MUF. It used to be called the Minority Undergraduate Fellows Program. It's now called the NASPA Undergraduate Fellows Program. So folks who are familiar with higher education are familiar with NASPA. But originally that program was a pipeline for undergraduate folks to enter the field of student affairs to really diversify the profession and bring those perspectives that were really needed in the field. So I was part of that program, and I had an amazing mentor. And as a first generation Latina, the bachelor's degree was the end for me. That's all I knew, because that was the highest anybody in my family had ever aspired to. And so having an amazing mentor, she said, where are you going to graduate school? And I was like, oh, I'm not going to graduate school. I'm just getting a bachelor's degree because I'm a first generation student, and this is just a huge milestone. And she's like, if you want a career in student affairs and higher education, you need to pursue graduate school. And so as a good student, I listened, and I pursued a master's in college counseling and student development. And almost 10 years later, I pursued the doctorate in education here at Cal State Long Beach. So I'm a proud alumni of this institution. But again, it was not the original plan, but I think in all of my involvements, I just felt this strong joy and aspiration to help others. And so again, music industry, not for me, but helping students and developing them and educating them and teaching them, not in a classroom, but outside of classroom through student affairs is where I found my passion. Thank you.
Thank you. Gwendolyn, how did you become an educator? Oops.
Hello, everybody. So sorry. I thought I was unmuted. So I'm Gwendolyn Nolasco, and thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction. I don't know. I think my trajectory sounds a little bit different. I started working with students when I was in 8th grade, and I did so because my aunt was a TA for an elementary school in LAUSD. So I would go along, and there was like a summer program where we can go help elementary school students with their homework. We were just really checking their homework, and I was paid for it. So the my employee number for LAUSD when I actually became a teacher was the same as when I started as a tutor in the 8th grade. But I knew that I wanted to become a teacher when I was a 9th grader. I went to Huntington Park High School, and my experience at Huntington Park with the teachers that I had meant that becoming a teacher was more about becoming an advocate for students. I wanted to be that force of change and support for students of color. I felt that that support wasn't there for me when I was a student at Huntington Park High School. So it really drove me to become a teacher. I remember one of my English teachers said, if you don't like it, become a teacher and change it. And that's what I did. So I enrolled for my bachelor's program. And much like Ms. Moreno said, you know, my highest aspiration was, you know, a bachelor's. I went on and did my master's in English, as well as my bachelor's and my credential in English at Cal State Long Beach. And then in 2012, I thought, you know, I'd really like to earn my doctorate. I'd like to be a teacher for teachers. You know, the changes in school systems are so slow that sometimes reaching out to students is a real quick way of seeing that change and that support system, you know, manifested in the school system. So I began teaching at a middle school in LAUSD for 3 years. Then I moved on to teaching high school for 10 years in LAUSD before transferring to Long Beach 3 years ago. So I have 16 years, I'm sorry about that. I have 16 years, just the cops back there, 16 years working in education, and most of my experience has been working with students of color. And as a teacher of color, I have found that extremely rewarding. But I can't wait to talk to all of you a little bit later about how to navigate those challenges. When you are a teacher of color, things are a little bit different in the workplace. And after 16 years, I can safely say, yeah, it's not just me. So I can't wait to share those experiences with you.
Yeah, we want to make sure to give you the opportunity to do that. So when we initially envisioned this panel, our team was thinking about things like, how do you manage things like workplace bullying or different situations and challenges in the workplace, microaggressions. But since then, we've had the COVID-19 crisis. And so one of the questions that of course floated to the top as our folks were reviewing the questions for the panel is, if you can talk a little bit, and we're still in it, right? It's not over with, but how you've personally navigated personally and professionally navigated the transition from how we operated in the world in environments pre-COVID to how you're managing this change now. And so I'm going to go to Blaine again.
Yeah, I want to thank Gwendolyn for just being very upfront and very direct about the challenges of being a person of color in education. And I think I'm going to try to do my best to blend this in the conversation about COVID-19. What we do understand about education is that there is a great divide and achievement gaps will persist, right? When we talk about the definition, all of you who are on the call have been studying research on equity, I'm sure. Every university seems to purport an idea of social justice and equity. And when we understand equity to be, in my own definition, at least as an educator and as a man of color, is that there are certain, in education, there are pedagogical gaps, there are infrastructural gaps, there are fiscal gaps, right? And then an equity approach is to look at ways that we can dismantle those gaps and restructure, right, how we're approaching those gaps to make sure that everyone has access, right? You've seen images of the definition of, I really like using my hands. And so I've seen on these Zoom calls, some people don't use their hands, some people are kind of stiff. I'm gonna use my hands, that's how I talk, right? So we look at how people visualize equity. It's not about, giving everybody the same that everybody else gets. It's giving somebody what they need individually. It's accommodating, it's individualized. The problem is a lot of us don't really know what a lot of kids need and what a lot of adults need, especially in the COVID-19 crisis, right? So we know that these equity gaps existed before COVID-19, and they're persisting, and they're even exacerbated after this experience. How I've been processing this as a man of color, right? Looking at just the number of deaths in the Black community, the number of deaths in the Latino community that are not being addressed, right? And not really being talked about the way they need to talk about. I'm really concerned about the level of trauma that our kids are going to come back to when they do come back to school in the fall. What they've experienced in terms of not just their direct family members, but indirectly how they've been affected, right? Just the distancing that they've had, the social and physical distancing that they've experienced, and how that affects children, especially adolescents and children, smaller children. I have 2 young kids at home myself, and my heart is broken, and I'm devastated every time I think about how much my sons need to be at school. I don't fulfill the need, right? Mom doesn't fulfill the need in terms of, it's not just, schooling is not just about education and learning, it's about socializing, right? And so kids need that time. So how I've dealt with it, I went through a grieving process, right? I missed everybody and everything that I used to do, my old routine. Then I got a little comfortable. I'm like, oh, I really like this working at home thing for a second. But then I got up and I was disoriented. What time of the day is it? What day of the week is it? And then you're just like, okay, I'm twiddling my thumbs trying to figure out what I can do. Because, what can I do differently? How can I reinvent myself, right? How can I reinvent what I do to serve a bigger and broader purpose, right? As a leader in the community, you're always thinking about service, but now how can I do things differently to serve in a different way? So I am equipped to be able to deal with what I'm gonna face in the fall. And that's one of my biggest challenges right now. I think as a leader in education, in the educational environment, I was talking to somebody today at the Los Angeles County Office of Education, LACO, about not just the SEL community curriculum for students, the social emotional learning curriculum for students that we're gonna need to plan for now as leaders, right? Because we need to have that infrastructure in place, because we know that we're gonna have heightened issues around trauma. But it's not just the curriculum that we put in place for students, but what are we doing for staff? What are we doing for the teachers and for the support staff? How am I as a leader gonna expect my teachers, I already was asking a lot of them before COVID-19. How am I gonna ask much more of them now when they haven't grieved, right? And they have different feelings. Everybody's in different places, right? We're doing device collection, a textbook collection right now for 9th graders today and tomorrow. And then later on the week for 10th, and next week for 11th, and seniors are getting their caps and gowns next week. But bringing my classified staff back to the campus and asking them to interact, and the first thought is fear. They don't know what people are coming, where they're coming from and how they're coming to the community. So I would say that is a challenge right now. Just the equity in terms of access to technology we talked about, access to internet, that's been a huge conversation. But what about the access to social emotional health? What about that equity conversation, right? How do we deal with people's feelings, their mindsets in a safe way? That, I think that is a conversation. I don't think we're doing enough to really strategize around that as leaders in at least in Southern California, because that's not part of a larger conversation that I'm part of yet.
That's, yeah, very interesting point about the social emotional aspects and trauma, and the fact that we just go on like it's business as usual a lot without addressing that piece.
And I really despise the term the new normal or going back to normal. There's nothing normal about what we're going back to. This isn't, we can't normalize this at all. So I cringe when I hear that term, normalizing. There's no normalizing of anything. Everybody's life is turned upside down. Yeah. Everybody. I took an Uber today, and it was awkward getting in the Uber and putting my mask on, right? It was awkward. Just like, it's an intimate setting where you want to talk to your Uber driver. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. It's not normal. It's not normal.
Yeah. And the inequities that have emerged and the way they've emerged. Yeah. That's not going to go. It's not that it has ever gone away, but it's more evident and needs to be addressed more explicitly in different ways.
More intentionally, absolutely.
Yeah, more intentionally, absolutely. Okay, Connie, can you talk a little bit about your experience with this? Yeah.
I think I'll take a little bit more of a professional perspective of how I've navigated as administrator in higher education. And so I think while as an individual trying to make sure I'm safe, I'm healthy, I think one of the hardest parts was that I needed to be present and make decisions that were impacting our student, impacting our faculty, and impacting our staff. So I think the hardest part was that we were trying to figure things out. And while we were trying to figure things out as quickly, but also as thoughtfully as possible, it felt like we weren't able to move fast enough. Yeah. And so I'll give a very small example, but one that just stuck in my mind. We wanted to make sure our website and our social media was updated on how students can reach us virtually. It took us almost a week to get that website and the social media postings posted because we're worried about language and messaging, and it had to be vetted through multiple folks. So that took almost a week for students to have access to that information. And for some folks, I visit some college websites, not Long Beach, but others, they still don't have that information available to their students. But for me, 1 week was too long. And so again, we were trying to move so quickly and as thoughtfully as possible, but it just felt initially in mid-March that we weren't able to move as quickly as we wanted to, and weren't able to always meet the demands or have the questions or have the answers available that were being asked of us at that moment, because we were also trying to figure it out along with everybody else. And so I think for me it was a lot about giving myself some grace, giving other folks some grace, and understanding that everybody was just trying to do and is still continuing to try to do the best that they can. We're all dealing with this in different ways, and there's ebb and flows with that, and so there might be some good days and not so good days, and some frustrating days and some exhausting days, and being in Zoom meetings all day long, but we're all doing the best that we can. So again, I think it was having grace for myself, having grace for others. In regards to managing all of this change, for me, I always think of how can I advocate and be the voice for students who are being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So as Blaine was mentioning, people don't have access to internet. So how are we providing MiFis and laptops and letting them borrow these technology needs that they just simply don't have access to at their home? Or also how are we supporting students who are not in a home where they could be virtually present for a lecture, for a class presentation that they're going to be graded on? What are we doing for those students who are living with 5, 6 plus other people, and they don't have a quiet space where they can study and learn and engage in a conversation in the classroom? Or also for us, a lot of our students right now are experiencing housing and food insecurity. People are being evicted, and whether that is allowed or not allowed, they're being evicted. So they're being evicted, they're having to choose, how are they gonna provide food and meals for their family? So again, for me, I'm always thinking, how are we supporting these students? What resources are we offering on campus, and what resources are we building within the community to help and support our students during this very difficult time?
Right. Yeah. Gwendolyn, yeah, grace is a great word, isn't it? It's not, there's a thread there in what you're both expressing in terms of being conscious about people's feelings and being easier on ourselves and having grace with others, but attending to those emotional and physical needs. So, Gwendolyn, can you share out?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Connie and Blaine, for setting that up, because I'll give everyone here today a little taste of and a glimpse of how that, the work that Blaine does as a principal and Connie does as an administrator for higher ed, what patterns they're seeing, how that directly impacts the teacher-student interaction during this time. So, pre-COVID-19, I mean, any secondary teacher will tell you, if you're all about culturally relevant pedagogy, see, Blaine, I'm using my hands too. So everything around culturally relevant pedagogy means that as a teacher, you're developing strong relationships with your students.
Yep.
And oftentimes that means, your body language, everything that's in your toolbox around emotional intelligence, you use it. And you don't just use it at once. You're using your teacher lens in the classroom. You're critically thinking about how you have to change a lesson on the spot. So you're always on your feet, right? But then with being a culturally responsive teacher who really understands that relationships are vital to learning. You sometimes have to give a student space. You sometimes have to get a little bit closer. Sometimes you have to push. Sometimes you have to be that mentor and that advocate for that student. And that's challenging work in and of itself. So with COVID-19, the resources to do that and the space to do that is just not there. And some people say that it is. So there's those different mindsets, right? A lot of teachers out there are saying, oh, we just can't do the work the same way we used to. And some teachers are saying, no, but we need to be able to do that work. So I think for me personally, I like to be an overachiever. I think it's because I'm first generation and I've seen my parents who are immigrants work multiple jobs. We were also evicted. We went through all of that emotional trauma, and we carry, as teachers of color, we carry those experiences with us. So when we get an email from a student saying, I've had to move to Nevada because they're sending me with my grandma, and could you please give me a week to do this work, or could you give me some different type of work? Can you mail it to me? We are naturally inclined to go above and beyond because we see ourselves in our students. We say, that was me when I was young. I always hear people saying, we need teachers who look like our students, but I think teachers of color need students of color to remind us why we do what we do. So what I'm trying to say is that it was emotionally difficult for me because as an overachiever, I like to do that extra work. So, social media, I know I shouldn't be looking at it all the time, but, seeing people transform rooms into classrooms, seeing teachers, driving past their students' homes and leaving them packets. I just wanted to do all of that. So I found that it was emotionally draining for me because of that, but also because I've never had to report so many cases of child abuse as I have in these past few months. And that is the work that you'll engage in, that these evictions, this abuse, this intolerance is real for so many students that you'll be working with in the future. And
Oops, I think you froze up there a little bit.
Froze up.
you have to be correctable. I was on the phone with Long Beach PD, and I said, I'm so sorry. If I'm lagging, I apologize. I said, I just cannot, I have to report this. I just wouldn't live with myself if I didn't report this. And this person said, it's your job. And then I was reminded, it's not about how we feel, it's what we have to do. And it is draining. So I'm still, teaching online. I'm still going to my meetings. I'm still I'm still a mom. I'm still a wife. I'm worried about my health, the health of my son, my husband. So I realized that I'm not thriving. Currently, I am surviving, and it's not my fault. I've accepted that. And I cannot blame myself for a pandemic or anything that I can't control because of a pandemic. And that the hardest that I'm working now is really all that I can do. And we have to be okay with that. So that's how I've managed teaching after COVID-19. Thank you for letting me share that.
Rebecca, can I add on to something that Gwendolyn said quickly?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to, I really want to highlight what she said about being a teacher and educator of color. And I want to use a term that I've heard several times that she was mentioning, the vicarious trauma you're going to feel as an educator of color. Dealing with students who look like you, seeing yourself in them. You know, I come from a single family home. You know, one of my parents was an alcoholic, right? I can go down to my parents immigrated, lots of poverty, right? In my family, the story goes on and on and on. And seeing that in my kids, and then want to be there and want to be your kid's superhero and being supportive, you get immersed almost too much into, and I can't say too much because you end up doing it anyway. But as a principal, I can't tell you how many stories I have of, you know, just going home and not being able to sleep because I'm thinking about the trauma that my kids are facing at school, being a classroom teacher and being much more close to it. But I think as a principal, I have a lot more, I'm a lot closer to the intimate details of some abuse cases because you then have to maybe work with local police, work with the district to investigate the situation. I can tell you horror stories of what I've woken up to thinking about, right, and fearful of. But you have to find, I would say, navigating challenges, talking about that vicarious trauma. You have to find a way, an outlet. You have to find. I'm assuming most people on the call are either newer teachers or starting as educators in this work. So that's one thing I would say is be prepared for. Know that as a person of color, you know, people are going to naturally gravitate to you, and then you're going to also gravitate to people who need you. And because they need you, you're going to want to do more for them, but at what cost, right? You can't sacrifice yourself in the process. You have to find a way to detach and disconnect yourself at times. You can't do it all the time, but you have to find ways, healthy ways to do that. And whether it's through exercise, whether it's through just, I was going to mention also just making sure you have a critical mass of other educators that you're always going to, whether they're your a lot of teachers joke around about having a wine club, right? Having a group of people that you hang out on the weekend with, and you know, talk about stories that you can't really talk about at work, but that you're dealing with. You need to have a critical mass of people that you can go to, bounce ideas off of, and share. And most importantly, and for all the men on the call, cry with. You need, as an educator, you need to let your feelings out. You need to let those emotions out as often as possible. Otherwise, you will not function and you will not be effective as an educator dealing with the trauma you're going to face. And being prepared for what we're going to encounter in the next generation, I think we're going to have a lot more trauma that we're going to be facing with. So let's get ready for it.
Excellent. That you already answered our next question, which was, how do you manage all of this? How do you maintain some, you know, for lack of a better term, work-life balance, if there is such a thing? Or really, how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah.
Connie, can you share how you take care of yourself with all the stressors of being a higher ed leader and dealing with really difficult traumas? And
yeah, absolutely. I think my suggestion, I will share what I do, but I think I will start off by saying it's finding what works for you. You know, there's lots of different things lots of different things that work for different folks, and that's great. And I think that's awesome that folks find what works for them, but it's like, what works for you? So what works for me is that I like to departmentalize my responsibilities. Folks don't like that, and that's awesome. That works for them. So when I say that, I mean, when I'm at work, I like to be at work, and I like to give my 110% attention to work. When it's 5 o'clock and I need to be done with work, I like to be done with work. And that is my family time. And that's where I get to relax time. And if it's the weekend, I'm a early riser, and so that means I wake up at 5 a.m. and I start writing, I start prepping, I start doing whatever it is. So I'm not a all-nighter person. I'm a wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning person, because my brain is optimal early in the morning. And again, I say that not necessarily for folks to mimic that, but is to share that if this works for you, great. And if it doesn't, that's also great. And it's finding what works for you and how you are going to keep your sanity and how you're going to keep your peace during this time and even beyond this time. So I like to work out because of the pandemic. My partner is also working from home. And so we get to go on walks for lunch. And I've never been able to do that. I was a person who never took their lunch. I would work during my lunch and eat my food at my desk, which is not a good habit to form, but that is the truth. And so now I'm able to walk during my lunches. I like to box, so I box at home. We have at-home workouts. I put on my boxing gloves and wrap up my hands, and my husband and I, we box from home. And I also do, like, on phones, you normally have a function that could limit your screen time. So I have limits to my screen time, where if I'm on my screen for more than 2 hours a day or whatever I set it at, it warns me, like, you have 5 minutes left to be on your phone. And that's a warning to me, is that I have been on my phone too much and I need to be present at home. So again, those are just some things that I use to really create some balance in my life. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Are there times where I'm checking my emails and responding things late at night? Yes. And those are only things that I feel are super urgent and need my attention. And other things, if they could wait tomorrow, they wait tomorrow. So again, it's just finding what works for you. And those are some things that have worked for me.
That's interesting. That's something I need to think about, that phone control. Gwendolyn, do you want to share a little bit about how you maintain your own sanity and balance?
Sanity. For me, for those of you who've been on the call from the beginning, I think that's most of you. I said that I knew I wanted to be a teacher since I was in the 9th grade. And even as an 8th grader, I did a lot of work with students, and I love building relationships with students. Now that I have my doctorate, and my emphasis is educational psychology, so I loved reading research, and I'm a complete nerd. So I love reading research around the biology of learning and the psychology in education. And one study that I just, that is always in the back of my mind is how we carry biologically. This is a study done by a neuroscientist at USC, and how we physically carry the burden of others with us. Yeah. And why support groups, like Blaine was talking about, are so emotionally relieving is because we get to share our stories, and then we almost give our story to someone. And when we hear stories, we carry each other. And so by carrying someone's story with you, it can help change your identity, who you are, how you work, how you behave. And we like to toss the word equity around, and that's fine, but equity is really an intention. It's a behavior. It's not just a concept. So I cannot really divide the work home life too well, because I carry my students with me. I carry their stories with me. I carry their trauma. I relive my own trauma as a child daily. And this is one of the greatest responsibilities of being an educator of color. For those of you who are, is you get to relive your own experiences over and over again and reconceptualize them, sometimes based on what you're teaching in that unit. So at the end of the day, when I come home, I cannot strike that balance. Where I strike that balance is not at home, it's at work. So oftentimes I'll get asked to teach, like I know, well, I mean, this has been in LA and in Long Beach. I'm always asked to teach groups of students who are at risk, groups of students who are more challenging. And they're wonderful students, and no one will disagree with me. They're wonderful students. But the challenge I think that people are talking about is that they're unaware of their own barriers as students. And as a teacher, you have to constantly think about, how can I help Jamie overcome this? And sometimes that answer comes in a dream, honestly. Sometimes that comes in a conversation you're having with your father or your cousin or a friend, or colleagues at work. So for me, that's difficult. But when my principal says, hey, Wendelin, would you like to take on the lead position for this project? I'll say, thank you for considering me for this project, but I'm just not currently able to give it my full attention. And since children need advocates who can give them their full attention, I'm currently dealing with a lot. So this is a lot. I want to tell everyone a little story that they can maybe carry with them. It won't be too long, but a month after earning my doctorate at USC, my 6-year-old son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So he had lost 10 pounds in a week, and he was already sick during my ceremony. That same week, I had landed a final interview as an assistant principal for an assistant principal position. And I was so excited because finally the culmination of all my hard work, my studies, was coming to fruition. Well, I had to kindly decline my final interview and kindly decline their offer and all of the work that everyone had put into getting me on board. I felt guilty, but I realized that I had to considerably scale back on my efforts as a professional. I just couldn't do both well. And as my father said, you do one thing well, or you do both things half well. So I didn't want to scale back, but I knew that I had to do that for the sake of my son's survival. He's now currently on an insulin pump, which really helps. But to this day, sometimes nurses won't treat him at Long Beach Unified because of legality issues, and I have to leave work to do so, just to bolus him with some insulin for ice cream day. So it's taken a toll on my son and on our family as well. So I encourage all of the future professionals here to really reflect on how you currently spread out your time and how you currently spread out your talent, and ask yourself, are the places that I'm focusing my talents and my efforts, do they tie well with my principles and my priorities? And if the answer is they don't, then don't wear those multiple hats. Toss that hat out. You don't need to wear that hat. It doesn't align with who you are, and it'll cause attrition. And as a teacher, you just don't have room for that. You need to be 100% all the time. Thank you for letting me share that.
Thanks for talking a little bit about the importance of setting parameters at work, and that you don't have to say yes to everything that people ask you to do. So just as for time, we have about 15 minutes left. One of the things that we wanted to ask you, and then I'm going to open up the chat for our participants to ask some questions, is what if we were to ask you, and you've given tremendous tips here for future educators, what would be a couple of key pieces of advice or information you would give those that were studying to be teachers or entering the teaching profession at this time, or higher education as well?
I'd like to start, if you don't mind. I want to share something I got from one of my mentors. Actually have I keep this with me. I have kind of a, so this is a strategy. Keep a box of mementos, or I want to take a keepsake box in your office or in your classroom of all of the different nice gifts or relics, something that made you feel good, right? When someone would give you a thank you note, keep it in there in your office. You can go to it and remind yourself of that emotion when, that you received, that you felt when someone recognized your effort. So I have a box I take with my, started in my classroom, and I keep it in my office now. So one of the most important relics I have was when I became a department chair after my second year of teaching. So I was one of those teachers who was just like tap for everything. Going back to what Wendelin said, right? You're you know, you have to know when to say no. And I'm glad I said yes to this because it really started, it was the anchor for really starting my leadership as an educator. But I got my mentor was my principal. Her name is Dr. Christina De Jesus. She's now the Chief Academic Officer and President of Green Dot Public Schools in California. And she wrote this quote that I've shared this numerous times with other leaders that I work with and that I'm building capacity in. And I don't know where this quote comes from, but it says, excellence can be attained if you care more than others think is wise, risk more than others think is safe, dream more than others think is practical, and expect more than others think is possible. That quote resonates with me through and through because it has a lot to do with understanding my expectations and my core values and my ethics. As you ascend in your career, especially in all three of us in the panel, all four of us in the panel are our leaders. And we've been asked, and you're asked to articulate very clearly what your core values are as a leader. And I think it's something that a lot of us as teachers aren't really asked to think about. In the classroom, I remember going through your teacher ed program, and hopefully other programs do it. But I remember when I was going through mine, and when I've worked with novice teachers, that's not really a conversation that is breached. And I think it'd be valuable or invaluable if you as a new teacher, as a new educator, really think about what your ethical code is and what your core values are. It'll be much easier for you to make decisions that are hard if you understand what your core values are. And you articulate that in your syllabus with your kids, you talk to your parents, like you always have that language that you're always going back to, that this is what I represent, this is what I stand for, and making sure you own it. And you're not just, you know, taking some key phrases from researchers you've read in books, right? You take some of those ideas and you interpret them and you conceptualize them for how you're going to operate yourself on a daily basis. And they have to be professional, but also personal core values. I think that's what I would definitely leave you with as a learning nugget, is just understanding who you are. This quote has been powerful for me, but just understanding your core values and what you're going to stand for when things get tough.
Connie, do you have a couple, maybe 2 or 3 key tips that float to the top for our folks?
Yes. I'll speak to my favorite. So really seeking support, guidance, and mentorship. Yeah. So I would not be where I am if I did not seek support. So as an undergrad, as I shared my story earlier, if I didn't have that mentor saying, get a master's degree, I would have never gotten a master's degree. I would have gotten a bachelor's degree, which is still very valuable, but I would have not been in this profession. And so as a first generation professional, I didn't have family members to provide guidance on how to navigate a professional environment. And that was really hard. And so I had to seek out support from other professionals who would take me under their wing and show me the ropes and all of that good stuff. And so I think oftentimes I questioned in my mind, like, am I ready to move up? Am I ready for the next step? That imposter syndrome kicked in. I had doubt. I'm like, am I good enough? And it was always those mentors. And I didn't have one, I had many, because I wanted different perspectives, different strengths, different skills to help me at various stages of my professional career. And folks are like, you've been in this profession for like 8+ years, you should apply to be an assistant dean. And I was like, really? You think I'd qualified? You think I'd actually get it? And they're like, absolutely, you need to apply. So I applied. And guess what? I'm the assistant dean. And so again, if it wasn't for mentorships and that guidance I've gotten throughout my career, I would not be where I am. And I've learned that people often move up in their professions. You know, I think there are people who move up in their profession because they're really good workers and they work really hard and they move up. But I think a lot of times people move up because of that social capital and the folks that they tap and the folks that they tell, hey, I'm interested in being the assistant dean. I'm interested in being the dean. I'm interested in being the principal. And guess what? When those positions are open, they think of you. For the folks who didn't speak up and didn't share those career aspirations, those folks aren't thought of. And that is a lesson I have learned through my career. I was like, wow, I should tell people about my career aspirations because then they'll think of me for those roles. Like that was mind-blowing aha moment in my life. And so again, if I didn't have folks to really be that sounding board and provide guidance to me throughout my entire career, and that doesn't stop here, I'm going to have mentors throughout my entire professional career. And that's going to be really essential for my growth, for my development, for my advancement. So hopefully that helps. If you do not have a mentor mentor now. It doesn't have to be formal or anything necessarily. It could be someone you go to, do an informational interview, stay in contact with them, build a relationship, check in once a semester, whatever that looks like for you. I think it's important to have folks mentored to sustain them and continue to nourish those relationships throughout your career. So hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Thank you. Gwendolyn, did you want to share just a couple of quick things, advice for aspiring teachers in particular?
Aspiring teachers, for sure. If you're still a student who's not going into the workforce just yet, just explore how your courses have supported or challenged your positionality in education. I think that's going to help you determine where you can have the greatest impact, and it'll help you gravitate towards applying to places where you can be supported. If you are going to enter the field of teaching sometime soon, I advise you, if you're a teacher of color, seek out like-minded teachers or mentors who are willing to help you navigate that invisible workload, because it is there. That comes along with disrupting a master narrative. So being a change agent involves taking on some of the most challenging responsibilities in education. And you should never enter that work alone, because if you do enter that work alone, you may feel isolated, you will feel alone, you will feel constantly challenged, and it can drain you. So find like-minded people to support you. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where you say, I just keep hitting a wall everywhere that I turn, then maybe that means you're needed elsewhere. So think about that.
Thank you. We've opened the chat now for we have time for a couple of questions. If you want to raise your hand or raise a question in the chat, Dana and Wendy maybe can help out to monitor that. You can type your questions there. Or I don't know, do we have a small enough group now that maybe we can do the raise hand option also? So do you have some questions, final questions for our panel members? No questions? Oh, it's a quiet group. You guys must have given them really good advice.
Can I ask a question to the group?
Sure.
What fears do you have about becoming a teacher? In the fall or in the next couple of years, what fears do you have about walking into this workforce? Apprehensions, what are you reserved about? Anybody would like to respond to that?
What are some of your greatest fears, you guys? Maybe note down a few things in the chat.
Nobody.
Okay.
Not being ready.
Not being ready.
It's a great one.
Mm-hmm. Imposter syndrome.
Uh-huh. Been there.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Any others? Okay. Mainly uncertainty about finding a job next year because of the changes due to COVID. So lots of nervousness about employment opportunities. David Valderrama says going into student teaching in a virtual environment and then being expected to apply those same skills and competencies in a face-to-face environment thereafter. A lot of things came up here. Did one of you want to address some of that in our last few minutes we have?
I could address the going into student teaching in a virtual environment. I am a master teacher for a student teacher from Cal State Long Beach, and she had to make the shift from teaching in a classroom to moving online. And there were a lot of challenges involved. That's very true. I don't know. I think there's an assumption that you're going to be expected to apply the same skills and competencies. So that may not be the case. You may not be expected to apply the same skills and competencies into a face-to-face thereafter. But if you'd like to get in contact with me or just keep my email or information, I can talk to you afterwards and just help explain some strategies that you can engage in that will help you cope with that virtual environment. I wouldn't say don't do your student teaching or don't go into the teaching field. I actually think it's a pretty good time to show people what you've got. So I would say reach out and I can talk to you a little bit more about that.
Great. Thank you.
I think I also want to just validate the feelings of not ready or imposter syndrome. I know Blaine said that they resonated with that, and I think that that's true, even for myself as well. We're preparing for fall to be virtual, and whether we're ready or not, it's going to happen. And so I think I often lean on like my core values as a person, like how am I making my decisions? How am I going to support students? And again, it's going back to that grace. Let me give myself some grace. I'm going to give some other people grace. And I'm going to expect that everyone is doing their best that they can. I don't think any of us have ever been through a pandemic. I don't know if any of us have encountered trying to attempt going to a second semester virtual. And so we are all doing our best, but I think those are valid as like, am I ready? Like, can I do this? Can I continue to do this? Can I sustain doing this? So I think those are all valid. And so again, I lean back on grace. In regards to the job concern in higher ed, yes, I could see that there aren't as many job postings as there have been previously, but I know a lot of institutions who are starting to post positions. Because if you're familiar, I'm not too sure K through 12, but in higher ed setting, a deadline is about a month or so out. You may not hear back from them for a couple months, and then you get an interview, and then your first round interview, and then you're a finalist, and then you have to do background check, and then by the time you do your start date, we're talking 6 months down the road, if not more, for some jobs. And so I think that I'm starting to now see more positions being posted in higher ed in anticipation of that like cycle that we know just naturally has to happen. And that by the time, perhaps the end of the year, that these folks would be starting in these new roles. So I think we will likely in higher ed be seeing more positions being posted in anticipation for that cycle, because I'm even seeing that now.
Okay, I'm going to actually have Blaine address the one last question, which is relates to this navigating challenges theme. Yeah. How do you challenge status quo in a school when you're a new educator? How do you navigate when you think something's not right?
I think that's a phenomenal question. So thank you, Tiffany, for asking it. I think that the first thing I thought about was just how do you approach any new environment? Any new environment you're going to walk into, you're going to see things that you're just going to feel aren't right? So the first thing I would say is that you spend the first 3 months interviewing as many people as possible, sitting down and spending time with people. You're just doing your job. You're called to teach. You're not there ruffling any feathers, right? You're not, even as a new principal, right? You're not there to ruffle feathers first. Your first responsibility is to go in and learn the community, understand people, understand how things, the culture, the traditions, right? Understand the climate and also the culture. Your climate is how people feel, right? Different spaces. How does the teacher's lounge feel, right? How does the feeling looking when people walk in the morning, right? What does that routine feel like? With the lunch area, right? So, and parents, like when PTA meetings and stuff like that, go to those different spaces and just sit there and learn from people and ask as many questions as possible and let them know genuinely that you're there to learn. Keyword, learn. Challenging the status quo doesn't start immediately. You have to be immersed into the culture until you build enough trust with people so that your opinion and your thoughts are valid enough to be accepted, right? So, that doesn't come immediately. You can't force that thought process or that paradigm shift on anyone, right? You have to be a part of that culture and develop that enough trust in order for people to feel comfortable with you introducing new ideas and new concepts. Now, when people ask you for your thoughts or your opinions, that's when you share. But I would never, ever invite anyone as a new educator, as a new teacher, as a new principal, or even a new superintendent for thing all the way down the line, right? To walk in and say, this is what we're going to do. This is different. And you'll lose people right away. So spend, I would say, the first 90 days, right? First 3 months, learning as much as possible, sitting down, setting appointments with kids, with parents, even with your principal and your assistant principal, and just learning more about the culture. That way you're showing people that you care enough to learn about what's already established, and you're building enough trust to then be somebody they're going to ask for advice about. Oh, you're new. You know, we've been doing this for a while. You know, what are your thoughts as a new person? That's when you know you've established enough trust. That won't come immediately.
All right, that's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're at time now, and so I want to thank everybody that showed up, and mainly our panel members for sharing your experiences, your stories, your expertise. And we hope that you can continue to be partners with us. And we really appreciate your valuable perspectives. Okay, so thank you so much. And we look forward to working with everybody more in the future.
Absolutely. Great job, everybody.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank
Good luck.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.